Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic strips and comic books that people have stopped talking about. This week we're talking about Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. The movie is from 2007. I'm your host Kumar. My co-host is Jordan.
Hello.
Persepolis. So came out in French in 2000 and 2002 in 2 volumes. A little bit like Mouse came out in 2 volumes. I've only ever read volume 1.
Okay.
And I don't know if I should go into why that is right now or, so basically it's a story, the first volume is a story about a child. It's an autobiographical comic about a child growing up in Iran at the time of the revolution, which when she was about 9 or 10 years old. And it's told through her eyes. And so volume 1 comes out in English, I think, 2003. And I read it because everybody was reading it, and I thought it was awesome. Then she had her style was she draws in a very childlike style.
Yes.
It really looks like kids' drawings and what the kid is seeing of her world. A very precocious kid. She's very smart. Then volume 2 would have come out a little bit later, and it's about her in her late teens, early 20s, even into her early 20s into her first marriage, etc. And I remember picking it up and flipping through it and thinking it's still drawn like it's by a child, even though she's not a child anymore. And for that reason, I became kind of prejudiced against it. I felt like she couldn't draw. Well, I think she had a history with drawing kids' books and stuff like that. I think like picture books and things. I'm not sure exactly what her background was before she did Persepolis, which was, her kind of masterpiece, her magnum opus. But I felt like I didn't want to read this comic about a woman in her 20s that was still drawn like an 8-year-old child. It just seemed there was some sort of mismatch there.
Yes.
Now that might be unfair.
Yep.
Especially after watching the movie, but we'll come back around to.
We can come to it now. That seems like I can also talk about my experience with the comic.
Yeah.
I would have bought it quite a few years after it came out in a single volume. So both volume 1, so both book 1 and book 2 in a single volume, just called Persepolis, and I loved it. It's such a wonderful comic.
Yeah.
I just loved it. Especially, and I would agree, the first volume is stronger, I think, when she's in her childhood.
Yeah.
For various reasons. I think, as you say, her perspective as a precocious child looking at the strange world of adults, the world of religion, the world of social inequality and social class, and the changes that took place in Iranian society in that period are all lent such a kind of like stark and interesting perspective from that of a child, and the art lends itself well to that as well. I would agree with that. I would always stop reading. So I would reread this over and over. I think I might have mentioned, Kumar, last time I saw you that it was my bathroom book for a while, and I would just reread it constantly. But I would usually stop after she went home from Austria. So
right.
Some time as a teenager living in Austria, and we get a lot of those things that interested me about in the first volume, the things about growing up. Alienation and the difficulty of navigating kind of like strange and mysterious adult worlds. And then she returns to Iran, and I always found that part to be a bit less interesting. And I was thinking about it this week. How am I going to explain it to you? And you took the words out of my mouth, literally. I feel like the art style,
yeah,
and also the storytelling style, just that kind of comfortable immediacy that she goes for with the personal kind of the first person narrative. I think it and the imagery, because she uses a lot of fun images.
Yeah.
In the back, people blowing smoke out of their ears, floating, meeting God, and he's kind of like a marshmallow man with a long beard.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is so wonderful in the first volume, and I feel like it doesn't carry over as strongly in the later parts of the book.
Yeah. And another, really unfair comparison is Mouse, but it's the one everyone talks about, especially when this first came out. It was like, oh, it's like Mouse. And this is going to be really unfair, but Art Spiegelman drew that way. He worked very hard to come up with that style. Now, he's one of our top cartoonists. Like, he is very mercurial. He can adapt and create a new style and draw like other people or draw whatever the strip needs. And he worked very hard to come up with the right art style for Mouse. And I felt like Satrapi with Persepolis I felt like she could only draw this way. Now, I haven't seen her kids' books or those
I haven't
picture
seen
books
any
or
of her
whatever.
other art, but I imagine it's her style.
It might just be, I feel like she only has one style. Now, that said, even in the comic, there's a great moment where, as a 9-year-old child, she's reading this comic book about dialectic materialism. And it's such a great moment because that's the kind of the seed. You're like, this is why she's going to this medium. This is her medium of choice as an artist to tell her stories, whatever they may be. So
that never occurred to me, but I think you're right.
Yeah. And I will also say she also draws in a similar, there's another French cartoonist named David B. Maybe, I can't remember what his actual name is, but his pen name is David B. And he's done a bunch of autobiographical comics, mostly about his brother who has epilepsy. And he's got it's just black and white. So that's another thing we probably haven't mentioned. It's pure black and white. There's no gray. It's just inks. So
quite similar to this, although obviously.
Yeah.
I thought of I didn't think of Mouse when I was sort of reflecting on the comic in preparation for this. I have read Mouse, but I didn't think of Mouse. What I thought of was Arab of the Future.
Okay.
Riyad Sattouf.
Okay.
Have you read that one?
No, I haven't.
I think it's quite similar. It's or as in the sense that it's an autobiographical comic. It's French.
Right.
And there's a connection with the Middle East. So there are just some kind of very kind of obvious parallels. You
know what I was thinking of was Under the Shadow, this horror movie by an Iranian-born director living in the UK. And it's an awesome movie. It's called Under the Shadow. And it's got this thing. I think the reason it reminded me of it is because I think any Iranian story from around this period is going to have certain elements that come up. You're going to have the revolution and the hijabs, and you're going to have the war with Iraq. And that's exactly what happens in Under the Shadow. And that movie's, there's always this thing in horror movies where they're like, why don't you just leave the house? Just leave the house. Just leave the ghost house. Just get out of there. She leaves the ghost house, and then the morality police arrest her for not wearing her hijab and send her back home.
Send her back in the ghost house.
Yeah, that's why. So it's like
a straightforward analogy there.
Yeah,
I think I get it.
Yeah. So I was kind of like, and then they get the bombs landing in the houses and stuff and all that kind of stuff. So similar imagery. By the way, I should mention that the whole reason I said in episode 1 we weren't going to be doing much animation. There's like maybe 5 or 10 animated movies that I thought we should cover on the show. This was one of them, but I wasn't planning to hit one as early as episode 5. But the reason I did is because we've currently got these protests happening in Iran, hijab burnings happening because this young woman, Mahsa Amini, 22 years old, was arrested by the Marjane police and died in custody like a week later. And now we've got this huge protest. I don't see anything about it on the mainstream news. It started around the same time as Queen Elizabeth II died, and like I think.
Good luck for getting another news.
Yeah, because of our fucked up universe, it was like, okay, this is what we're gonna have 24/7, and nobody's talking. And these protests, as far as I can tell, are still happening, but you have to kind of dig around. And you're seeing these women are lighting their hijabs on fire on the street, and it's kind of like, another. Yeah, there are. Yes, it's another Arab Spring, another revolution. Something's going on out there.
Absolutely.
So I thought, let's get to this as soon as possible. It's because it's really on my mind at the moment, and it always is. Anytime I go to a Persian restaurant and they have pictures on the wall from before the revolution, Tehran looks like the most cosmopolitan, hippest place in the world. And obviously it wasn't, because the Shah was tyrannical, but people are like partying, like super well dressed. Everybody looks dressed up to the nines all the time. Just looks like the most amazing place in the world. And so it's always, this book is a big part of this book and a couple of horror movies are like all I really know about. We don't get art from inside Iran anymore. We get expatriate art. It seems like there's another horror movie, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, this kind of Iranian vampire movie, not shot in Iran, but it was an Iranian director, and it's supposed to be set in Iran. And that's all I know about it. But this book is a big part of my psyche in that sense. I mean, I think about it a lot.
I think that's fair. I think it would be true for a lot of people that this would be kind of a very kind of formative the narrative of modern Iranian history, especially since 1979. I think this work has done a lot to shape people's perceptions of those events.
Yeah, because until 2000, I mean, when you thought about Iran, you thought about the hostage crisis.
Yep.
It was like 79. Then you thought about the Iran-Contra scandal with Oliver North. And then this book was pre 9/11. And she talks about like how Arabs are perceived in it. So it's got everything in it. It's really pretty amazing. And I think that part of it too is the kid herself as a child is such a great character.
Yeah.
And is so right about things and so wrong about things. She's like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes or something like that. Like sometimes she's so right about class and all that kind of stuff, but then she has these ridiculous ideas about, like, when she hears about the torture that her uncle went through, her response is to make torture games in the street.
Yes.
With her friends, and they're like chasing kids around with nails.
Yes.
And stuff. Like, it's really it's amazing to me too, because my memory of my childhood is so poor, like weak. I don't think I could assemble this many anecdotes from my childhood and assemble a narrative, and also to not be what's the word? She's not immodest about how smart she was as a kid, if you know what I mean. Like, she's aware of that she was a different kind of kid. And her parents are aware of it too, but that's why they send her away. And I think there's a line in the movie after she's grown up and they send her away. They say, "The Iran of today is not for you." Like, it's such a great line. It was really that kind of summarized the whole book. Like, she has a love for the place, but none of the regimes that keep coming and going are going to be. She's never going to fit in anywhere. Yes. It seems like.
That yes, absolutely. The theme of alienation. I agree. Yeah, it's a feminist work in the sense that part of Marjane's kind of play, as you say, there's no place for her in Iran because of her outspoken intelligence. In part, she's always outspoken. She constantly speaks up, and it constantly gets her in trouble.
Yeah, stands up in class. Makes these points. The other students are cheering for her. The teacher's pissed off. Parents are getting called in all the time. The parents are great characters.
And they celebrate her for it. That's right. They are very sympathetic, extremely sympathetic figures. Not like Satuf's father in Arab of the Future, who's this complete fool of a man. The relationship between Satuf and his father is a big part of that book. Hopefully, Kumar, they'll make a movie of it so we can talk about it someday. But yes, the parents are very sympathetic. Her family, her grandmother, they're all wonderful, interesting, and warm characters, and fun to read about.
They're both quite liberal.
Yes.
And the grandmother is too, and they are participating in the protests and the marches. Yes. It's quite. I mean, the mom makes her punk jean jacket,
yes.
and also makes this chain with I think it's got nails or screws in it or something like that, like
that's
this
right.
punk rocker kind of chain.
That's right.
It's interesting too because I think in the movie version, the central thing is actually the relationship with the grandmother. Now, I haven't read volume 2, so I can't tell how big the grandmother is in it, but I felt like she's a larger presence in the movie than she is in part 1 of the book.
I would say so. I agree.
Yeah. I feel like they kind of said we need to have something central to focus on, and that was kind of it. Because it's a little bit anecdotal the way the book is told. You get very short chapters, they're 4 pages. They're just kind of like one incident or
was
one
it
thing.
Serially originally before it was?
As far as I can tell, no. I think, as far as I can tell, it came out in 2 volumes. I think part of it came out in. I think it says in the credits. Hang on, I'll just have a look.
All right.
I feel like it says part of it. Published in France in 2 volumes. In 2000 and 2001, I feel like I saw somewhere. Oh yeah, a portion previously appeared in Ms. Magazine.
Okay, that makes sense.
So maybe that was
some serial storytelling going on.
Yeah.
I think something carried over to the film. I suppose we can begin talking about the film now. Do you think? Or have you?
Yeah. Was there anything else? Let me just see if there's anything else. A lot of the things are in the movie too, so we'll end up talking about both. But what I found it's really chilling. Within the first 3-4 pages, it's kind of frightening. Like the threat of government authorities coming down to you, and there's this guy with this heavy beard and very scary looking eyes who's lecturing them on morality. And it's already kind of scary right at the outset. And the moment that was most chilling for me, there's a real 100% 1984 moment in it where the teacher has been telling the kids day in, day out, indoctrinating them, telling them that the Shah was chosen by God. The Shah was chosen by God. And she comes home and repeats this to her parents, and her dad's like, no, let me tell you what the Shah's really about. And she's actually descended from royalty. Way down the line, her great grandfather or something was a prince or something. Anyway, before he was deposed by the Shah. And then after the Shah is overthrown, she comes back to school and the teacher's like, okay, tear out all the pictures of the Shah from your textbooks. And she's like, what? And it's such a real, the price of chocolate has gone down 20 cents, has gone up 20 cents, that kind of thing from 1984. That's but it's real, it's really happening.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention that, and I don't know what to say about it except how great it is. But even that, to pull off within 3 pages in these very simple childlike drawings, the kind of fear and terror that they have to live in, and the uncertainty and
you're correct, quite right. Yeah, you get a real sense of the power of authoritarianism just within a few pages. He even appears on a television, doesn't he? That sinister being that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's on the television. He has a thunderous brow and a heavy beard. He's announcing that the universities are going to be closed because they are hotbeds of Western decadence.
Yeah. And what else? Oh, she's writing her own manifesto / holy book. This is really, she calls herself a prophet.
Mm.
As a little kid. There's all this great stuff in here. And then the way volume 1 ends is her parents send her away to live in Vienna. They're like, things are too dangerous here, and we're going to send her away. She's been overseas by herself once before. She went to summer camp in France.
Yes.
And she's been learning French at school. So like we know we have a friend in Vienna. You can go live with her. We'll come see you in 6 months. And it's actually kind of a great cliffhanger ending for volume 1. Or it could be the end. You might not know what happens, except that this book has somehow been produced 20 years later or whatever. Okay, but we can move on to the movie because they're quite similar. Now, this is one of few instances. So it's from 2007. It's only about 90 minutes long. It was directed by Satrapi herself and someone named Vincent Paronnaud. I don't know who that is, but he's apparently a cartoonist as well.
Oh.
The only name I recognized in the credits was Catherine Deneuve. But there is an English dub of this. I've got this DVD that I bought used somewhere.
Right.
Subtitles are a bit like iffy, like there's mistakes in there and stuff, like spelling mistakes and stuff. And
that's interesting. I watched it I streamed it actually. I also have a DVD, but my DVD player broke. So I streamed it on Stan, and the subtitles were quite good.
Okay.
I thought.
Well, these are pretty good for the most part, but there were one or two moments, like there was just a few spelling mistakes, and there was one moment in particular where, when Marjane's mother says to her father, she says, "Should we run away?" And in the comic, he says, "Pourquoi?" He says, "Why? So you can become a cleaner and I can become a taxi driver."
Yeah.
And the subtitle in this edition, which is My Fun DVD, I don't know. The translation is, she says, "Why don't we run away?" And he says, "You'll become a cleaner and I'll become a taxi driver."
Oh, that's not right.
No.
That's not right.
So there's like some moment. Anyway.
The Stan one was good.
Okay.
If you're interested in watching the film after this, you can stream it on Stan.
Yeah.
And if you're in Australia, God knows where you can watch it on if you're anywhere else.
I don't know. Okay, so Catherine Deneuve, and her daughter apparently is the voice of Marjane. Deneuve's actual daughter plays her daughter in the movie. Yeah. So yeah, it was a French version. So I think there are a few instances where we've got a director, the writer of the comic, actually directing the movie. I can think of two others off the top of my head.
Okay.
So, interesting thing right off the bat. So it starts out, you got a color intro. We've got a framing device where it's a flashback to her in the like near present maybe, or I can't remember which trip. She's at the airport. And then it fades into black and white, but it's not the strict black and white of the comic. It's actually a grayscale, which is amazing. It actually, I feel like the grayscale solves the problem of the young versus old that I had with the comic. I feel like it kind of equalizes it somehow, where you've got a style that's too sophisticated for a child to draw in terms of the shading of it. But it still has that line art that's like a kid drew it. But there's some things, like when you see the prison where her uncle was, it's like so gothic and like there's all these kind of effects, black and white grayscale effects.
Yes, it's recognizably the style of the comic. You couldn't possibly mistake it for anything else. But you're right, it's taken that style and run with it.
Yeah.
Taking the style, and they've added some sophistication, some imagery, some effects.
Oh yeah. And there's some things like, well, I'll tell you, I was, in terms of being instantly recognizable, I was watching it in the living room. My wife walked in. She's never read Persepolis. I think she's maybe seen the cover of it. And she walked in and looked at the screen for 1 second. She said, "Persepolis?" I was like, "Yep." She knew exactly what it was. I was going to say, there's some great things that, like, you couldn't even do in the comic. Like the like when you get the flashback to how the Shah came to power and overthrew the old empire and started the new empire, it's done like a kind of puppet theater thing. And there's other things like when the Scud missile strikes, the Iraqi Scud missile flies in, you get a first-person view of the missile coming in to hit this house. And it's just like these split-second moments, and the music's really interesting throughout. And usually in movies, I'm like, stop trying to manipulate my emotions with this music, and I find it really annoying. In this, I find it's part of the mood. It's in there working with the black and white at all times to really, you get a real sense of the tension, especially since it's a cartoon. There's a cultural temptation to treat it more lightly. So, putting in this heavier, tense music really helps to amp things up in moments.
Yes, and I think the music is good. The music is excellent. Perfect accompaniment to a lot of the scenes. As you said, there are these creative things that they can do with the animation.
Yeah.
Obviously couldn't be done just with the drawings. And I would agree with you that it solves the problem, if it could be called a problem, of the lack of change in the art style from the world of the child to the world of the adult. Because it's always moving, there's always things happening. And I think that kind of visual medium of film with the puppets and there's pop-ups and there's transitions and there's other effects occurring, and it works really well in the film in a way that it doesn't work quite as well in the comic the longer the comic goes on.
Right.
So I think that's a good point. I think that's an excellent point. But what's so the film, you enjoed the film, I take it, Kumar?
Oh yeah, am I going to hear that you didn't enjoy the film?
No, I enjoyed it too. But I would be, but everyone knows that if you've been listening, I'm a curmudgeon. I'm happy to talk about some of the things.
Okay, I'm going to talk about all the things that I really loved. I also think some moments in it looked rotoscoped. Like there's a moment where these soldiers lift their rifles, and it really looked like they'd used actors and then drawn over them, or something. They'd rotoscoped it or something like that.
Possible. Are there any special features on your DVD? No making.
Oh my God, this was an X Video Easy rental, so I don't think there's anything on there. I think I bought this at a thrift store somewhere. Pretty sure.
I shouldn't have asked. We haven't watched it. I don't even know why I brought it up. There was no special features option on the streaming service.
Right.
All right, things that you loved about the film.
So I like that. There's moments like when she starts going on a rant at the dinner table or with other people, and like her mother rolls her eyes. Like we don't get those tiny little touches in the comic. Moments like that. There's a part where I think it was her uncle has to cross he's going back home in the winter. And he's walking through the mountains in the snow, and it's just like, wow, this is so much more effective.
And the Kremlin or St. Petersburg or something rises up in front of him because he's crossing the border into the Soviet Union.
Yeah. And there's like addresses to the camera, which is an unusual thing. Like there's a moment where characters all start speaking directly into camera in like what do you call them, like cameos. It's like the screen is black except for a spotlight on them.
Yeah. Well, you can that's it. You've got an animation, and you need to replace, I suppose, some of the text, which can't, unless you want to have a voice. There is a voiceover, obviously, it's unavoidable, but you can't have a voiceover running through the whole film, I suppose. So you need to find other ways to get that message to, break the fourth wall, or to speak directly to the. And I think they make quite a few choices to do it through these visual moments, these visual effects. And it's funny to talk about a visual change because comics, this is a visual medium, and film obviously also a visual medium, but they take advantage of the ability to animate these and use these visual devices as narrative. So the spotlights, the addressing camera, the first person view of the Scud missile, Uncle Anush walking through the mountains and approaching St. Petersburg. or I guess it's just a kind of a vaguely Russian-looking cluster.
Yeah. Yeah.
The prison this is all things you've said. The prison like a Gothic castle.
I'm gonna point out one more moment that I thought was really great was so they are leaving a party. It's very illegal to be at parties or have parties or to be drinking, but they're stopped by the cops on the way home. Yeah. And Dad's been drinking, and they're like, okay, you've been drinking. We're going to go back to your house and see if you've got any alcohol back there. Get in your car, follow us. We're going to go back there. So they go back, and it's the same in the comic. And Dad whispers to the ladies. He's like, go, hurry up to the house and dump all the alcohol while I talk to these guys. You sneak up there and do that, and I'll keep them busy. Same thing happens in the so they get out of the car and they're about to go up there, and one of the guards says, hey, where do you women think you're going? And then the grandma makes an excuse like, I have diabetes, I need to go get my medication. She's like, oh, my mother has diabetes, you go up there. Fine. In the movie it's the same, but when they're walking away, one of the guards actually does a double take and notices them leaving. He's like, he actually moves his head twice. He's like, oh, those ladies are walking away. Hey, where do you think you're going? And it's such a little moment of perfection that it's very hard to pull off in a comic. Without her writing the words. One of the guards did a double take. Unless she says that, you don't. There's life in these moments in the movie is what I felt.
Yes.
Okay, but go into what
that's fine. This is a good structure. So you've talked about the things that you really liked about it. Now I'm going to talk about the things, the handful of things that I didn't like.
Okay.
About the movie, and this is going to sound wildly inconsistent because I've just praised the film for doing this.
Okay.
But for using visual storytelling as an alternative to the first person narrative that we get in the comics. There's a lot of that comic that appears in the box. I'm sure there's a specific name for it. The text, you have word balloons and
like a caption.
Yeah, captions. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of caption text in where Marjane talks to us essentially.
Yeah.
She explains what we're seeing. Quite often, how what we're seeing relates to a previous event or previous page or circumstance in the narrative. It's been omitted from the film. As I said, understandably, otherwise it's just going to have a voiceover the whole way through. But I think it had the effect of making the vignettes feel more self-contained and isolated from the general.
Oh, right.
And it felt like the film lurched around a bit tonally as well. Like you would have a very serious scene and then a lighthearted scene clearly taking place in different places and different times.
Mm. And
this is a minor quibble. But yeah, I felt like the narrative was broken up a bit more in the film as opposed to the comic. I think there's a specific moment that I can point to that's maybe kind of pointing to what you're talking about. So everybody starts fleeing Tehran. The streets are almost empty. But her parents have decided to stay. I can't remember exactly what their reasoning was. Maybe that was the point about the taxi driver thing. Also, they've got some neighbors called the Baba Levis who live a few doors down or in the next building or something. Yes.
And she has a friendship with the daughter of this family. Mm. And one day a Scud missile lands in her neighborhood. She's like, oh, my God, it's my building or my house. Or she runs home.
Well, yes.
She runs past a barricade. And her mom runs out and she's like, it's okay, we're safe. And Dad and Grandma aren't here. And she's like, phew, okay, everyone's all right. But as she's leaving, she sees in the rubble, she sees the hand of her friend with the bracelet on it. And in the movie version, and it's like any book to movie adaptation, we don't get any of the relationship with the Baba Levis. We don't hear their names. She comes home to see the missiles crash. She runs in. Her mom says it's okay, we're all safe, just like in the book. And she sees the hand in the rubble, the dismembered hand with the bracelet on it, just like in the comic. But in the movie we have no context for.
No, we don't know whose hand did it. It's just the horror of seeing a hand.
It's the horror of seeing a hand. It's not even like this is a friend that I spoke to, or.
Whereas as you say, they're in the comic, they're the Barbolevis. That we hear a lot about them. They're one of the few Jewish families that live in their neighborhood. The daughter, as you say, she's friends with her. The daughter's beautiful, kind of like a real kind of beautiful soul.
Yeah.
And then, sure enough, their house is, and there's the moment with the mother where they're in like horrified anticipation, and the mother's trying to reassure Marjane, maybe they're out. Like, yes, it was their home that was destroyed, but maybe they're not here. Maybe they went out.
Right.
We just don't know. Like, and Marjane thinks to herself, because she's bright, it's the Sabbath. They will absolutely be home.
Yeah, right.
Well, and obviously, I mean, and that's the movie would be like 12 hours long if it had all of the content.
Maybe, but it's only 90 minutes long.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it could have been.
This is the first 90-minute film we've had. All the others have been 2 hours.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what? There's another weird moment that I was like, why did they omit this moment? There's a moment of cruel irony in the comic where someone, was one of her relatives or a friend of the family has a heart condition. They need to fly him to another country for treatment. There's a long visa and passport process to get a passport to leave the country. So they're like, they apply for the passport, and there's all sorts of ironies here where that man's wife, the head of the hospital used to be their window cleaner, but under the new regime, he's been placed in power, and this is the person she has to beg to allow him to go overseas for a heart operation.
Yes.
So they apply for this. In the meanwhile, they're like, okay, let's get a fake passport for him. We know a guy that can do it. And he's like, it'll take a week. That fails because that guy's captured by the police before he can make the passport.
I think he flees, but his lodger, the person.
Oh, that's right.
He's hiding.
Anyway, he's busted and he has to run. So the guy, the man with the heart condition, dies, and we get a caption telling us that his passport arrived on the same day. That they buried him or the day he died. And this tiny little detail is not in the movie.
No.
We go through the whole thing about we're applying for a passport. We get the thing with the fake passport. We get the thing where the guy has to flee and can't make the fake passport. But there's, for some reason, at least not in the translation I'm looking at, there's no mention of the passport arriving on the day.
It's not. I would have noticed. They don't mention that. It's a shame. And I think Satrapi's really a master of finishing a page on one of those captions. She has really.
Oh yeah, because you turn the page and you're like, okay, now what's going to happen? But it's not. The horror is that that's the end of the story.
Yeah. She's got.
You move on to the next chapter, and it's like, now something else.
It must be a good. I'm sure it's a great the comic. This is the physical comic. I'm sure it's a good translation because a lot of the language is quite starkly beautiful, and there's some very expressive, simple sentences. There's some lines that I love. You know, like there's when the fake relationship between her maid and her neighbor is brought to an end because Marjane's father goes and tells the man that it's actually his maid that he's been writing letters to and not his daughter. She goes and the maid is crying, and Marjane hops in bed with her and cuddles her to cheer her up, and it finishes with the caption, "We were not in the same social class, but at least we were in the same bed."
Yeah.
and I find the comics full of great lines like that, really beautiful. Or when Uncle Anush is sentenced to death, and his last visitor is Marjane, and and he says to her, he says, "Star of my life." It's beautiful.
Yeah. We should mention here the translation of the first part is by Matthias Ripa. Translation of the second part by Blake Ferris.
Maybe. Oh God, poor Blake Ferris. I hope it's not his translation why we don't like the second part.
Well, I haven't read the second part. It might be a great translation.
Well, I find that I don't enjoy the second part half as much as the first one. I think I've made that clear. Okay, back to the movie. I've been talking about omissions What else?
Well, in addition is the Godzilla sequence.
That's
which is added.
Yeah, you're right. That's it. Which had a special credit at the end of the film.
Yeah.
That mentioned that it appeared on license from the
Toho. Yeah. So there's a whole sequence where she goes to see a Godzilla movie with her grandmother, and after they come out, the grandmother says the Japanese are only good at killing themselves and making terrible movies or something. I can't remember what her line is. She has a funny line in there.
Oh man. But what a funny, the one thing really, or one of the few things that I suppose isn't directly, you can't find a parallel of some sort for. I
actually love that because I feel like, because Satrapi was directing it herself, like.
We're getting her vision. I mean, you can't blame.
And I feel like she could put in, here's a thing I didn't put in the comic, but was a great moment with my grandmother that I can put into the movie.
We just have
is us going to see this Godzilla and this conversation we had afterwards. And it's a really it's such a interesting parallel to see the destruction of Godzilla versus the destruction that's actually happening on the streets of Tehran at the time. There's something telling about how it's a casual entertainment at that stage. I don't know which Godzilla they were watching, but certainly everyone after the first one and except for the first one in Shin Godzilla is just a destruction porn, for the most part. And to have that as their entertainment while outside on the street people are actually getting bombed and stuff is really, it's a very. You have to kind of stop and think about it. They never commented on the movie, but I felt like that was one of the reasons it was put in there.
Very good. Very good. But in contrast to that addition, if I could talk about an omission.
Okay.
This is just carrying on from the previous theme about leaving out some of making the stories, robbing the stories of some context by losing the captioned storytelling that occurs. And not just that, but the scene when she's in Vienna and with her first boyfriend. Her first boyfriend is a bit of a heel.
Yeah.
That you haven't read Volume 2.
No.
In the movie, like, it's quite straightforward. Her first boyfriend's a jerk.
Yeah.
Right? He cheats on her.
Yeah.
And then we get that scene where he's a monster.
Yeah.
And he makes her pay for stuff. He makes her buy his weed.
Yeah.
He's a jerk.
Yeah.
In the comic, on the other hand, he's not. He gets some slightly more sympathetic.
Okay. Yeah.
She does. In broad strokes, it's similar. Everything's lovely. Then everything's terrible, and she realizes that he didn't treat her very good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a coda in the comic where she says, I forget the name of the guy, but she says, this is in the caption. She says, in retrospect, I no longer blame, what's his name? I needed him to be father, mother, brother.
Mm.
And it shows there are all these little drawings of him as each of those people.
Yeah.
One after another, all in the same pose. It's quite an effective little device. And we're left to think this ties in that story as part of her theme of being alone.
Yeah.
In wherever she is. So in this case, she's alone there and she's latched onto him, and she basically implies that she was kind of suffocating because she needed so much from him.
Yeah.
Her loneliness and her alienation. Completely missing from the film. This guy's just thick.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention that. I wasn't aware of that, but I found the relationship stuff to be the least interesting part of the movie. It was the kind of the dragging section. Then she goes back to Iran. She gets married. She has a nervous breakdown, and the meds seem to really deaden her, depress her. And then she kind of magically just gets back up one day and like, I'm going to fight. And we get the Eye of the Tiger sequence then, I think. She sings Eye of the Tiger and suddenly she's over her depression.
We get an accelerated timeline. Again, in the comic, I must admit in my reread, I didn't quite make it to that point. But I recall it being a little less abrupt.
Yeah.
A little more contextual.
But there was something, I don't know why it was, I think because for us as outsiders, seeing the stuff about Iran and the revolution and all that kind of stuff is really new. Seeing a bad relationship, nervous breakdown, depression is something we've seen before. Now, of course, it's a central part of her story. Of course, it's got to be in there. But I just feel like it was lacking the thing that made the first half appealing.
I would be inclined to.
But
and
then I would say when the thing that makes the movie really get back on track is the climax where they're having a party, cops are coming up, you get back and forth, cops driving up the street. Again, something she probably doesn't do in the comic, I imagine. There's very tense cops driving up, partying, cops driving up. You get cuts back and forth, and then there's a death.
Kinetic in the book as well.
Yeah,
not to the same, but it is. But it's quite. It is, and there's some dialogue in the comic that's missing from the film. After he topples off the roof, the Guardians of the Revolution return, or the Morality Police, or whatever, and they say, "Your little buddy has gone to hell. Let's load up these whores."
Wow.
And they left that out of the film.
I'm going to say that was a good thing to leave out of the film, because I don't know exactly how the comic ends, but in the movie that is structured as the straw that breaks the camel's back. Like, that is the moment of harshness and cruelty that is just beyond the pale, because they're just partying. They're not doing anything wrong. The Guardians show up, chase these guys. They're running for their lives across the roof. One of them doesn't make the jump and falls to his death. And that's the climax of the movie. And then their parents are like, you can't stay here anymore. Iran's not for you. And she moves to France. So I feel like cutting that line was pretty important to the flow. Maybe they even animated it and edited it out. I don't know. But it feels like the way the flow goes, you need to have that fall to the death be like the crucial moment, the central climactic moment of the movie.
Yes. No, that makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah, it's the comic finishes as well with that, but I think there's less of a strong causal link between that event and
right.
But it's right. It's exactly the same. She says, the mother says to her, "This time you are leaving for good. You're a free woman.
Yeah.
Your life today is not for you.
Yeah.
I forbid you to come back."
I forbid you to come back. Yeah. Yeah. It was really a powerful moment. Okay. I think
I have nothing else bad to say about the movie. I think we get a bit less stuff about social class and sex in the film, which is a shame, especially because she wears some of that stuff about her understanding of Marx and her relatives' kind of like association with communism and Marxism, Leninism, so quite plainly on her sleeve. And in the comic, of course, she's conscious that her maid doesn't eat at the table with her, that her father drives the Cadillac. She's aware of differences in class. That's sort of not present in the film.
Yeah.
And
and you pointed out there's a moment where Marx shows up to talk to God in the clouds.
Yeah, and you don't know who he is.
And you don't know who he is. They don't say that he's Marx.
Yeah, unless you've read the comic, you won't know he's Marx. He says something about the struggle. Maybe he says something famously associated with Marx in French.
Yeah, maybe it's really obvious in French.
But I would say certainly it doesn't appear obvious that it was him.
Yeah.
So I think that's also something, but that's a minor quibble.
Yeah.
So should we go into our three questions?
Let's do it. Okay. Comic, yay or nay?
Yay.
Oh, absolutely.
Times yay. It's fantastic. The whole thing. I mean, I've said that I don't enjoy parts of the second half. Only parts. I quite like the stuff that's set in Vienna. But I've said that I don't but nonetheless, it's still both volumes great. Give it another chance, Kumar, by all means.
Okay.
It's a wonderful, wonderful book. One of my...
No, I do feel, especially after watching the movie, I felt like, I really should give the second half a chance. Like, it was unfair in my dismissal of it.
Wonderful. Almost essential reading, I think. Really just a wonderful story, a wonderful book.
Okay, movie, yay or nay?
Look, we have to say yay or nay, don't we? Look, I'm going to say yay.
Okay. I'm gonna give it a big yay. I think it's a really great movie.
Right.
I think if you didn't have the comic, if you weren't reading them, if you weren't consuming them side by side, I don't think you wouldn't notice that the Bava levies hadn't been mentioned in the movie. You know what I mean? It's just,
Yep.
I think it's very smooth beginning to end. I think visually it is astonishing. It is incredible to look at.
It is beautiful. You're right. I suppose I'm only less enthusiastic because I can't help but think if you could read the comic, I mean, why watch the movie? It's true. I mean, and this is not a full-throated denial. I'm still going to say yay.
Yeah.
It's definitely a yay for me, but I feel, and I really wanted to like this too because I really like Persepolis, and I wanted to sit down and watch Persepolis, the comic, come to life on the telly. I was so ready to love it.
Yeah.
And I really did enjoy it. I was enjoying it. And then as it went on and on, I just sort of just started, that bit wasn't present. Oh, that particular theme is sort of a bit attenuated here in the film. Yes, but as you say, perhaps if you could read it, if you could look at both. I mean, if you could read it, if you could have the comic open in front of you as you watch the film, so you can have comics context.
I think my opinion is actually colored by my first viewing of the movie several years ago, which was probably, like 5-10 years after reading the comic. So the comic was not fresh in my mind when I watched that movie the first time. And I was really floored by it. And I do think that the reason why not just read the comic instead, I think the art style of the movie is better than the art of the comics. I'm
glad.
But you're mostly right. It's a 90-minute movie, and I read Volume 1 in about an hour. Like, I set the afternoon aside, I was going to sit down and read this, but actually it was a very fast read.
Yes, it is a quick read. And look, I almost watched the film first.
Right.
And I might have had something different to say if I'd watched the film before I did my reread. I mean, I know the book quite well because, as I said, I read it many, many times. A lot of the lines are graven in my mind from the many reads I did. But I can't help but wonder if my DVD player had been working and I managed to watch the film before doing another reread of this book I love so much, maybe my opinion of my yay would be more full-throated.
Okay.
Somewhat qualified yay.
Okay, well, now here's a key question. Adaptation, yay or nay?
Now, as we've said, we reserve the right to be inconsistent.
Yes, absolutely. There's no ground rules here. You can just say what you want.
If you're looking for a coherent intellectual framework for determining what constitutes a good adaptation, you're not going to find it here.
I'm gonna go first. I'm gonna give it a huge yay.
Okay.
I think it's co-directed by Satrapi herself. I think there's no mistaking that this is Persepolis. I think almost everything is. There's nothing in there except for the Godzilla scene. There's nothing in there that's not that didn't come straight from the comic. I think there's a through line of narrative that is true to the spirit of the book.
Good. Now, you see, I was prepared to come in and say nay, I think.
Okay.
Because I felt like it wasn't enough. What was missing, like these small things that I pointed out, the way that the narrative got a bit broken up, I thought it dragged at times, and I didn't feel as engaged with the story as I did reading the comic. I was coming in prepared to say it didn't, to give a nay and say that it wasn't transformative in the way that I wanted a good adaptation to be.
Yeah.
But I think talking as we have about the way they've taken the art and elaborated and embellished and animated it in the film, I think the way you spoke about that, I realized that I'm persuaded by it. I'm persuaded by it, and I think it's worth watching as an animation. as you said, they've taken the drawings, which are somewhat childlike, somewhat simple, and it's really polished and beautiful in the film. So you've changed my mind. I'm going to give it a yay.
Okay, excellent. I think this is our first.
I think it's the first time we've agreed on
sextuple yay. Maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
Not that a yay always means that it's good. I mean, I loved.
Right.
As I said, like in the first, I really liked. I really liked the Friday Foster film.
Yeah.
I consider it a good adaptation.
Yeah.
But this is definitely it's our first sextuple yay.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's a good lead into next week's episode, which is going to be Glenn Danzig's Verotica.
If I could ever think of something that was the polar opposite of Persepolis.
It is. They're in different universes. I will say it's the second one I can think of where the writer of the comic directed the movie.
Oh, good. So we're going to have a double feature in that respect.
We're going to have a double for Halloween. Ooh. And what else do I need to say about it? I don't know. That's it. Okay. Verotica next week. Comics are very hard to find. The movie is probably a bit easier. If you can't find the movie, at least the Red Letter Media review is out there.
I'm going to watch that again in preparation.
All right. Excellent.